Greetings, good listeners. Welcome to Tales from the Mennonite Heritage Archives, where we talk about people, places, and events from Mennonite history. I'm your host, Dan Dyck. Regular listeners will have noticed that we periodically chat with staff at the MHA. These are the folks that daily come face to face with visitors and the stories that live on through the collections and records housed in the MHA vaults. Today I have Graeme Unrau in the studio. He's the administrative assistant to Archivist Conrad Stace and is key to the smooth running of the MHA. Graeme answers phone and online inquiries, welcomes visitors, pulls records from shelves for guest researchers, coordinates book sales, and does about 1 billion other things. He also helps out at the MHA Art Gallery next door to the MHA. He's the kind of guy that makes an art of deploying yellow sticky notes to keep track of everything that needs organizing and coordinating. Welcome, Graeme.
Thanks for having me.
How long have you worked at the MHA?
We're coming up on 3 years at the end of July.
Has your previous education background helped you at all in your job at the MHA?
I had political studies with a minor in German, and even though my ability to speak it is fairly limited, and I hadn't used it for a few years, it still helped me when working with documents. And I was actually able to pick up reading the Gothic script fairly easily, and then just researching, writing a little bit. Those are skills that I think have served me well, and just trying to stay curious.
Tell me about where you grew up and what you knew about your own family's Mennonite history and culture before you worked at the MHA.
I grew up rural in a Sommerfeld Mennonite church, and I didn't realize how outside of the mainstream of Mennonite that was. I grew up with German in church still, so that was something that, even though I didn't speak it, it was still something that I was familiar with.
High German or Low German?
I think it was Low German, and there was a debate, when my dad was younger, about the High German to Low German conversation. But for me, it was Low German. It was Low German, and then it was Low German split service, Low German English, and then after that, it became English when I think I was probably about 16. I'd moved away from my hometown around in my kind of early 20s, but it wasn't really until I started working at the archives that I realized my experience was a fairly small corner of the Mennonite experience, and how varied and deep the Mennonite story was. I'd heard about the revolution and Mennonites kind of fleeing the communists, and hadn't really thought about that being a Mennonite story, but it actually wasn't mine because my ancestors came earlier. But that story also kind of stopped there. We didn't talk about the Mennonite migrations after World War II and that kind of continuing story. It was very much this thing that happened around the turn of the 20th century and had ended with the arrival of Mennonites in the 1920s. It was very much like an Our Story package given to me, and then working at the archives has led to a lot of unpacking of that. And there's whole corners that have not been explored, like in this house. There are rooms that have not really been opened.
Can you give me an example of a room that particularly piques your curiosity?
There's kind of the complexity of the Mennonite experience in present day Ukraine, with the waves of fighting that took place there in World War II. And I know that that's deeply personal for many of the people that I meet and work with at the archives. Mennonites who grew up in the Soviet Union meet the German army coming in, and then all the layers and layers of identity, and then the post-war with you have repatriation of Mennonites who fled with the German army and then ultimately get sent back. But there is a period in the post-war where you have that, where you have Mennonites being sent back to Russia who had very actively been fleeing it. So that's one area that I think a person can go really deep in, and many people have, but that's newish to me. And I mean, even with the Canadian Mennonite Board of Colonization records at the archives, like lately I've been hearing more about Atlantic Park and some of the things that happened there. So this is a location in the UK in England, where immigrants were held prior to coming to Canada, and just the extent of kind of bureaucratic barriers and kind of actively limiting the movement of Mennonites to Canada. They weren't really wanted in Canada at the time. There was a lot of political reasons for that. And just, learning more about those stories. In my role, I get to hear bits and pieces of a lot of things, but I don't often get to do deep dives.
Has your work at the archives piqued interest in your particular ancestral migration patterns?
I mean, it's explained to me a little bit about why we are the way we are. My understanding of those first migrations are people who are motivated largely by kind of a religious conservatism, as well as a desire for economic opportunities. They were generally not part of the educated or wealthy. So they were people looking for opportunities, but they're people who had not had a lot of opportunities. They didn't do a lot of writing. They hit the ground running. They didn't have a lot of supports. Education was not a huge priority. They really were just surviving. And their life was focused on church life. And so you don't have the same level of written material from that period that you do from later periods. And there's a lot of cultural layers to that, and kind of the outcomes of that of their religious views and their ideas around engaging with the wider society. And I think that with the time, you also have maybe a less strong sense of identity, like a less unified identity. And so then that's also meant that a lot of the material or kind of collective identity or collective memory isn't there in the same way. The idea that there is this single story is not true, I don't think. And it is impressive to me that we've managed to keep this huge range of experiences and beliefs and churches all kind of under the same umbrella.
You have a personal interest in plant life and in growing things. How has your work connected you with these and other more general interests?
I mean, the first one that comes to mind is immediately the Katerina Thiessen collection here. A midwife who has a number of recipes in her collection, as well as a Kräuter book, like a herbal remedies book. It's illustrated, and so that's been a big treat when I get to handle that book and explore it a little bit and bring it up at outings with friends, some of whom are pharmacists, and so then they kind of nerd out about it. And so that's been a fun collection to work with occasionally. Yeah, there's a Jacob Suderman collection of watercolors, I believe it is, that it's been published. That's an interesting side. Often when people think of the archives, they think of written material, but we do have some artists and art collections and paintings in the archives as well. But some of these paintings were done while in situations of like duress, and the ability to see beauty, I think, is was still present for these people. And so seeing those collections is interesting. One collection, of course, I should mention, the Rudy Friesen collection, which includes a lot of the research he did for his book, Building on the Past. That book and the material is fascinating, and that's something that I really want to spend more time with. I haven't spent.
Tell me about the theme
really
of that book.
time.
What's the topic or subject matter?
Building on the Past, it looks at Mennonite architecture in Ukraine and what was there. There's floor plans, the stories behind different buildings. That's fascinating to me. But it's really a rich document.
You are often the first person that visitors meet. What are some memorable interactions with people, and what made that interaction memorable?
I think for me, I've often been inspired by the enthusiasm people show and the sheer scale of the projects that some of them have completed. There was one particular visitor who came in and was so excited by what we had and what there was to learn. She had been a nurse her whole life, and she had recently retired. And she just told me she's just like learning. She's learning about everything she can possibly learn about because she was super deep into nursing when she was in her career. And so she had kind of made it a mission to pursue all of these things that were exciting to her. And she was so passionate about learning. And that's invigorating when you meet people like that. It also has challenged some of my perceptions of what you can do when, with a lot of the visitors to the archives writing books and doing PhDs and their master's degrees and just going back to school in retirement. That's been something that's challenged some of my timelines.
You've been on a few field trips with the archive staff. What have you learned from these experiences?
I didn't realize how rich of a history southern Manitoba had. I think I had some preconceived ideas of it being kind of flat and empty. Those ideas have been challenged by traveling around and realizing that there's a lot of treasures down there, and there's a lot of really committed people who are volunteering and working with other cultural organizations or like heritage sites. Fort Dufferin comes to mind. It's just it's an interesting place that if you haven't been, you should seek that out this summer at some point. The Sean Sheds location, which I just had a cairn unveiled. I think it was within the last couple of years. There's a lot of stuff, and it's very close together. But if you don't know it's there, you could easily miss it. These events didn't happen long ago at all, really, at least in archive time. So, I mean, if you're talking like 120 years, 150 years, that really isn't that long. That's not that many generations.
What has surprised you about your work personally and about the overall work of the MHA?
I think I didn't realize within this wider community, and really depends on commitment, people who feel that the archives is part of their story and is preserving a part of their story. And that's something that it's not immediately obvious to someone from the outside. It's not a publicly funded space. If people don't care what's in the archive, if that sense of community is gone, then the archive isn't, it's not a sustainable project.
Graeme, it's been a joy and a pleasure to work with you over the years in my earlier volunteer efforts at the MHA and now as the host of this program. Best wishes in your future studies, and stay in touch.
Thank you for having me, Dan.
That was Graeme Unrau, the boss of all things administrative at the MHA and all-around great guy. The words, "No, I can't do that," are simply not in his vocabulary. Graeme is leaving the MHA to pursue architectural studies. The Tales team and everyone else at the MHA is really going to miss him.
Hello, I'm Conrad Stace, the archivist at the Mennonite Heritage Archives. Your donations help preserve and share stories like the one you just heard. To send a gift, visit our website at mharchives.ca and click on Support, or give us a call at 204-560-1998. Thanks also to our partners, Canadian Mennonite University, the Centre for Transnational Mennonite Studies, Mennonite Church Canada, and Golden West Radio.
For upcoming episodes, we're working on a story about idealist, independent thinker and author Peter Jacob Clausen, who began his writing career while still in Imperial Russia and never stopped once he arrived in Canada. We're also working on a story about artist Marta Gertzen-Arman from the village of Courtice, Manitoba. And in case you hear a rerun, it means we're taking a wee break to enjoy the fine summer weather or working on more stories we'll bring you in the future. Thanks to the Tales team of Conrad Stace and Graeme Unrau for their work on the program. I'm your host, Dan Dyck. Tales from the Mennonite Heritage Archives will be back soon with more stories about people, places, and events from Mennonite history. Thanks for listening.